SciPod Books presents Space Prison by Tom Godwin. Read by Mark Douglas Nelson. Episode 4 of Space Prison by Tom Godwin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Space Prison, Episode 4. Lake made the trip back to the caves in a fraction of the length of time it had taken him to reach the plateau, walking until he was ready to drop, and then pausing only for an hour or two of rest. He spotted Barber's camp when coming down off the plateau, and he swung to one side, to tell Barber to have a supply of the herb sent to the caves at once. He reached the caves to find half the camp in bed and the other half dragging about listlessly at the tasks given them by Bemin. Anders was in grave condition, too weak to rise, and Dr. Chiara was dying. He squatted down beside Chiara's pallet and knew there could be no hope for him. On Chiara's pale face and in his eyes was the shadow of his own foreknowledge.
"I finally saw what it was."
Chiara's words were very low, hard to hear.
"And I told Bemin what to do. It's a deficiency disease, complicated by the gravity into some form not known on Earth."
He stopped to rest, and Lake waited.
Berry, pellagra. We had deficiency diseases on Earth, but none so fatal so quickly. I told Bemin, ration out fruits and vegetables to everybody. Hurry, or it will be too late."
Again he stopped to rest, the last vestige of color gone from his face. "And you?" Lake asked, already knowing the answer.
"For me, too late. I kept thinking of viruses. Should have seen the obvious sooner. Just like—"
His lips turned up a little at the corners, and the Chiara of the dead past smiled for the last time at Lake.
"Just like a damned fool intern."
That was all, then, and the chamber was suddenly very quiet. Lake stood up to leave, and to speak the words that Chiara could never hear. "We're going to need you and miss you, Doctor." He found Bemin in the food storage cavern, supervising the work of two teenage boys with critical officiousness, although he was making no move to help them. At sight of Lake he hurried forward, the ingratiating smile sliding across his face. "I'm glad you're back," he said. "I had to take charge when Anders got sick, and he had everything in such a mess. I've been working day and night to undo his mistakes and get the work done properly underway again." Lake looked at the two thin-faced boys who had taken advantage of the opportunity to rest. They leaned wearily against the heavy pole table Bemin had them moving, their eyes already dulled with the incipient sickness and watching him in mute appeal. "Have you obeyed Chiara's order?" he asked.
No,"
Bemin said.
"I felt it best to ignore it."
"Why?" Lake asked.
"It would be a senseless waste of our small supply of fruit and vegetable foods to give them to people already dying. I'm afraid—" the ingratiating smile came again. "We've been letting him exercise an authority he isn't entitled to. He's really hardly more than a medical student, and his diagnoses are only guesses."
"He's dead," Lake said flatly. "His last order will be carried out." He looked from the two tired boys to Bemin, contrasting their thinness and weariness with the way Bemin's paunch still bulged outward, and his jowls still sagged with their load of fat. "I'll send Wes down to take over in here," he said to Bemin. "You come with me. You and I seem to be the only two in good health here, and there's plenty of work for us to do." The fawning expression vanished from Bemin's face.
"I see," he said. "Now that I've turned Anders's muddle into organization, you'll hand my authority over to another of your favorites, and demote me back to common labor?"
"Setting up work quotas for sick and dying people isn't organization," Lake said. He spoke to the two boys. "Both of you go lie down. West will find someone else." Then to Bemin, "Come with me. We're both going to work at common labor." They passed by the cave where Bemin slept. 2 boys were just going into it, carrying armloads of dried grass to make a mattress under Bemin's pallet. They moved slowly, heavily. Like the 2 boys in the food storage cave, they were dull-eyed with the beginning of the sickness. Lake stopped to look more closely into the cave and verify something else he thought he had seen. Bemin had discarded the prowler skins on his bed, and in their place were soft wool blankets, perhaps the only unpatched blankets the rejects possessed. "Go back to your caves," he said to the boys. "Go to bed and rest." He looked at Bemin. Bemin's eyes flickered away, refusing to meet his. "What few blankets we have are for babies and the very youngest children," he said. His tone was coldly unemotional, but he could not keep his fists from clenching at his sides. "You will return them at once and sleep on animal skins, as all the men and women do. And if you want grass for a mattress, you will carry it yourself, as even the young children do." Bemin made no answer, his face a sullen red and hatred shining in the eyes that still refused to meet Lake's. "Gather up the blankets and return them," Lake said. "Then come on up to the central cave. We have a lot of work to do." He could feel Bemin's gaze burning against his back as he turned away, and he thought of what John Prentice had once said. "I know he's no good, but he never has guts enough to go quite far enough to give me an excuse to whittle him down." Barber's men arrived the next day, burdened with dried herbs. These were given to the seriously ill as a supplement to the ration of fruit and vegetable foods, and were given alone to those not yet sick. Then came the period of waiting, of hoping that it was all not too late and too little. A noticeable change for the better began on the 2nd day. A week went by, and the sick were slowly, steadily improving. The not quite sick were already back to normal health. There was no longer any doubt. The Ragnarok herbs would prevent a recurrence of the disease. It was, Lake thought, all so simple once you knew what to do. Hundreds had died, Chiara among them, because they did not have a common herb that grew at a slightly higher elevation. Not a single life would have been lost if he could have looked a week into the future and had the herbs found and taken to the caves that much sooner. But the disease had given no warning of its coming. Nothing, on Ragnarok, ever seemed to give warning before it killed. Another week went by, and hunters began to trickle in, gaunt and exhausted, to report all the game going north up the plateau, and not a single creature left below. They were the ones who had tried and failed to withstand the high elevation of the plateau. Only 2 out of 3 hunters returned among those who had challenged the plateau. They had all tried, all of them, to the best of their ability and the limits of their endurance. The blue star was by then a small sun, and the yellow sun blazed hotter each day. Grass began to brown and wither on the hillsides as the days went by, and Lake knew summer was very near. The last hunting party, but for Craig's and Schroeder's, returned. They had very little meat, but they brought with them a large quantity of something almost as important: salt. They had found a deposit of it in an almost inaccessible region of cliffs and canyons. "Not even the woods goats can get in there," Stevens, the leader of that party, said. "If the salt was in an accessible place, there would have been a salt lick there and goats in plenty." "If woods goats care for salt the way earth animals do," Lake said, "when fall comes, we'll make a salt lick and find out." 2 more weeks went by, and Craig and Schroeder returned with their surviving hunters. They had followed the game to the eastern end of the snow-capped mountain range, but there the migration had drawn away from them, traveling farther each day than they could travel. They had almost waited too long before returning back. The grass at the southern end of the plateau was turning brown, and the streams were dry. They got enough water, barely, by digging seep holes in the dry stream beds. Lake's method of stalking unicorns under the concealment of a woods goat skin had worked well only a few times. After that,